and gentlemen, what the proposition side is doing is painting us an unrealistic world. They lack to know the true meaning what is freedom of speech. On their bench, they seem to mischaracterize and undermine the value of freedom of speech themselves. Nobody's come up and say that the freedom of speech we are fighting for. We all know freedom of speech, and if we believe them, it will create a world where we all misconcept the freedom of speech. If you look at the stakeholder in the real world, there are some people who will not believe and who are really gullible. What we do is that we want to make it clear. We want to create more clear line what freedom of speech is. We want to make it clear that freedom of speech is that we want to fight for the power that is stronger than us. Because as a citizen, if there are corrupt government or organization, we have freedom of speech to fight for a stronger power. But we cannot have freedom of speech to exploit, to hurt or victimize those who are weaker than us. So what the proposition side have is that to have absolute lie on freedom of speech, and that make people misperceive what is freedom of speech. They will think that they have absolute freedom of speech to do anything. There is no line what they can do and what they cannot do. So let's compare two scenarios. We cannot, if you hate someone and you think that the discussion will occur and it will change, it will better. No, it's not. Because in the real world, haters gonna hate. But what you have to do, haters gonna hate. And what you have to do is that you can still talk. We're not ignoring the idea that people are racist, but we have the space for us not to listen. We can stop on our scenario if we don't have absolute freedom of speech and we give them a true value what freedom of speech is. We can stop those people from spreading ideologies. And let's look at the people, different types in the real world. There are people who gullible that I say, right? And if people perceive that, freedom of speech is that you can say anything. Even you say that it doesn't harm any people, but what if it's untrue message about you spread news about like democracy, about the president who is corrupt, but you spread the untrue message. There is not even any filter on their side. Because people who are gullible will believe them, will truly believe them, and make improper decision. So it even undermines democracy on their side. But on our side, we have filter to know what is the true information. We have the right not to listen to those information that is distorted truth. And second is that they have no filter, right? And the second is that they have no space for those who are vulnerable. You can say that, you didn't engage with that at all when we talk about what about catcalling or vaccination. You say that, it's not related to your motion or what we're talking about. But in the real world, people, their vaccination also under the freedom of speech in the US. In the real world, people think that these are freedom of speech. And what you're telling us, you give us the resolution is that you tell us that, women will have freedom of speech to fight to those who catcalling her. But so you let the individual fight for themselves without protect them. So it's wrong at the duty of the state because state didn't protect but have individual to protect themselves. Is that the world you want to create? So you on your side didn't solve any problem. You didn't protect those who are vulnerable. You didn't protect those who are easy to believe. You have no filter. You have no space for those who can. As a woman, if you were sit down, please. If you were catcalling on our side when we don't have absolute freedom of speech and we tell people what is freedom of speech really is, we can women can make mobility, can progress, and can be sure to go out and to do other things. So you can say the same energy is like in the school. You can say anything to the children. Yes, sir.
Most people in Europe who end up joining ISIS do so because they were censored from talking about Islam in the public, causing any chance for them to be heard and engaged with to be removed, and thereby having to resort to extremism like the Paris bombing. This proves why the oppressed Muslim is guilty of hate speech and not the majority French public.
Okay, I'll tackle that later. But let me give you some comparative. First is that who can freely express ourselves, like you say that your goal is that individual can freely express ourselves, but on your side, you didn't filter them, you didn't protect them from hearing message. So what is up? You full information and you can give a proper judgment and know what you really want. So on our side, individual can freely express themselves more. And first, who foster democracy? On our side, we have the filter for people to, as I told you, and people can still, we will prove that on the status quo, people can still make a revolution, like a gay marriage in the US. In the past, we still have some certain extent of limitation, but people can still make a revolution. So on both sides, we can still make a revolution if what we want to tackle a power which is stronger than us. But yeah, so we can still make a revolution. We didn't undermine any democracy, but we fostered it. And okay, so let me. So what the proposition side fighting for is just the fairness of the law. But it has proven by research that catcalling actually harm women. But they just want the fairness of the law without considering realistic world. There are many types of people, as I have mentioned, and they didn't do anything to protect those who are vulnerable or easy to believe any information. And then they make propositions such as they elect a president who are corrupted. And it may lead to like a dictatorship in the long run. So they say that they want to fight for the real change to happen, but I think as I have compared to you, it doesn't, it will not happen on that case. Okay, so we are proud to oppose.
The 7 minutes 12 seconds. 7-1-2. Thank you, opposition whip. Now let's call upon the opposition replies to the proposed opposition case.
Ideas are a very difficult creature to kill, and we believe that no state has the power to kill ideas. But we think that we must allocate some rights of individuals to have a room to ignore and a safe space where they can enact and practice their own rights. May it be mobility for women who are afraid of being harassed on the street, or may it be a Muslim girl who wants to wear her hijab despite a very tense discourse when it comes to anti-Muslim rhetoric in the US. I want to prove why we want this debate quite clearly. The burden of government was to show that the benefits of their policy is better than status quo, and we allow for more protections for individuals. How did they attempt to do this? The first thing that PM said was the rule of law. It's very difficult to have laws wherein there is no tangible evidence and police will get confused, and apparently our justice system is so immature that we can't even determine when someone has real tangible harms even though it's not physically expressed. We told you that a lot of things can still be illegal even though they're not plain sight visible. Even if a person is not raped, but is afraid to go out of her home, afraid to pursue an education, we think that's far more damning than an individual's ability to determine when something is a crime or not. In reality, we know that these harms are real and felt by majority of individuals. In their world, their standard was this. They said that we're only going to criminalize if there's a tangible outcome. So when you have online bullying, given that for every one street teenager that commits suicide, there's 9 transsexuals who commit suicide. A lot of this is attributed to bullying, as stated by my leader of opposition. Their side will only criminalize after the person commits suicide and is extremely hurt. On our side, we are reasonable enough to know that people have an emotional limit, that individuals are social creatures and not just people affected by physics or tangible things of harm. We know that these harms exist and we protect people from this. They didn't really defend why they can still protect these individuals. Second, they try to prove visibility. But here's the thing, visibility is not exclusive. They never prove how we erase all bigotry. Because in status quo, you have limits on the freedom of speech in America, but we still know that the Westboro Baptist Church exists. We still know that people who support Trump exist. There are rednecks that don't want individuals to access abortions or contraceptives. They have all the visibility in the world. They have Fox News for crying out loud. Now next, we think that we try to argue the right to offend and why this is good for democracies. We really agree with Say in that aspect, right? The right to offense is a thing, but not to an extent where it harms individuals. And this is what we argue. In status quo laws, and I'll repeat this again from my speech and my partner's speech, that you have the right to say offensive things, but it's about where and how you say it. It's okay for a neo-Nazi to say it in a public park where people can avoid what he's saying, but it's not okay for him to do it in a captive audience space. The same reason why we don't allow pedophiles to go into like schools or other places where people cannot ignore them. And that's what the freedom of speech fundamentally protects, the right of people to ignore and protect themselves. So we still have visibility and we still have the rule of law on our side. These things are practiced, right? And their PM said that, wait a minute, people can't tell when something is a crime or not because people are biased moral beings. But in status quo, we allow juries to determine when moral areas are there. And that's what we argued on our side. We said that people can know when someone is offended and when it can go to grave harms, like emotional distress and the limitations of other rights. Now, what did our side argue? We said that there are some harms that are not tangible that affect the lives of people, may it be via catcalling, may it be via school bullying, and other things. We also told you how it protects fundamental things that people generally agree about, like the right to a freely informed democracy that won't fall into the trap of popularism and authoritarianism. We think that the right to life and the right of individuals to have that information is protected by the limitations of freedom of speech. Never mind that they didn't respond to my speech nor my principal argument on the rationale of civil rights and why we allocate it. That you can only use it to overpower structures stronger than you, but not abuse it to overpower those more vulnerable you. Zero response from government, too late for them to respond and reply. We take this debate and we're extremely proud to oppose. Thank you.
Speakers go for 4 minutes 26 seconds. 4 to 6. Thank you, opposition reply. We close this debate and let's invite government reply.
Here.
Let's first recognize that opposition has ran a completely negative case. We have provided you several positive responses on why freedom of speech is necessary for legislation to happen, for things like protections to even be heard of and why they are needed to begin with, for things like laws to be passed to protect minorities, right? Things like that were given in my entire second argument that were never engaged on their side. All they have done was to poke holes at our policy and probably talk about why certain things are probably acceptable and not, right? They constantly ask us again and again, where's the line drawn, despite me clearly telling you crimes like defamation, crimes like assault are already regulated in status quo, right? That freedom of speech is something entirely different, right? And therefore, when you come and harass us on all these kind of issues, we don't think that is really a very fair debate to begin with. Two things I'm going to talk about in my reply. One, is the state ever justified in criminalizing any form of free speech? And secondly, on which side is more effective in progressing discourse in society and therefore protect the vulnerables a lot better? Now, on the first argument, let's recognize that they never engaged with us firstly on the very fundamental principle case, right? They sort of didn't reply, but that's too late. That every citizen, regardless of how offensive one's viewpoint is because of disagreement, is necessary to calibrate political sentiments to continually changing context, right? Our side takes into account that times will always change, and what is acceptable and what is a hate speech will always change according to context, right? And therefore, what they have is a very static conception of what this debate really is about, right? We think that voices must necessarily be heard unless it causes direct quantifiable harm, like defamation and slander, where entire careers are destroyed and harm can be trialed and therefore measured in court, right? On their side, it is very hard to do so, right? Because as Jin said earlier on, what if I'm too sensitive and everything is harmful to me? Like, how the hell am I going to actually decide what is really, really harmful as a judge, right? We think the other example they threw at us was like people disrupting an abortion, right? We think that is a direct threat to the person having an abortion, right? So a lot of the examples really were only red herrings, right? But they never told our side why it's even possible for societies in the world to change and shift and actually calibrate themselves to changing context to begin with, right? And that's why they already lost, because they never responded to our POI. It's never clear where the line is drawn between the speech of an oppressed Muslim being considered hate speech or the actually oppressive French public merely demonizing the Muslim, right? Who is the one really doing the hate speech, and why do the French public get to decide what really is a hate speech, right? And this is why it is so important that we have freedom of speech as a fundamental necessary right so that oppressed minorities can also voice out that they are victims of hate speech in the majority and they aren't the ones really committing the hate speech at the end of the day, right? But let's take them at their best and accept that, okay, perhaps the harms from free speech could be very indirect and sort of far in its effects, right? Like the false information causing people to avoid vaccines altogether for their children, right? That was what my speech in DPM was about, right? That in a world where the state has so much power to censor and control the media and tell you what is right information and what is wrong information, chances are people will never know what exactly is the false information regarding the vaccines to begin with, and therefore wouldn't have the ability to call that out, right? We think that the ability to call out those kind of harms are only possible on our side as well, and that was my entire second speech. They never really rebutted against. Now, second issue, on why are we more likely to actually push for real political changes that protect the vulnerability, right? Now, first of all, they never disproved why political change and progressive legislation was more possible on our side, given that we gave you entire analysis about them, right? Not even engage with us on a counter model on why legislation is even more possible if people were censored from even talking about these issues to begin with in Parliament, right? We think on our side, what we allow for is that regardless of how sensitive an issue or how possibly offensive it is, politicians have no ability to shirk away from the responsibilities and actually deal with them, right? In creating political correctness, what politicians can do is simply to remove themselves from their duties and give the illusion to society that things are already fixed, that Black Lives Matter shouldn't exist because Black people already have equal rights in society, right? That is the kind of world they allow for, right? The kind of world they allow for is for Black people or oppressed minorities to never be able to tell us why their form of speech isn't a hate speech and why society should actually calibrate themselves to their context. Fundamentally, on all grounds, both principle and practical, they've already lost the entire debate.